Welcome to Mental Wellness. I'm Dr. Marty Lerman, your host, and for the next 30 minutes or so, we are going to be discussing some various issues that relate to becoming mentally well as to reinforce some of the things that folks are already doing to sustain themselves being mentally well. And we do this mostly out of recognition that we live in an incredibly stressful world today with lots of things that people are concerned about and worried about. And too often we find ourselves reacting to things that we're not in control of, but thinking that somehow we should. And the things we should be in control of, we find ourselves outthinking ourselves to the degree that we end up getting in trouble and really feeling awful inside, which then puts us in the hands of physicians that don't quite understand what stress is about, even though they're feeling it themselves. And typically what we end up doing is putting people on medications, one that aren't really necessary or effective, but most importantly, we tell people you're not in control of yourself. And there needs to be something else that needs to control you. And what we want to be able to do is to reinvest our energy into our own wellness. So we are taking back that issue of control. And what this program is all about is really teaching people and helping people, reinforcing the decisions people are making to accomplish that goal of feeling they're in control, of doing things that establish it, that reinforce it, so confidence starts to build again. And we actually present ourselves in a way that we actually have an inner sense of pride and can move forward in terms of our relationships and how we deal with other people that are important to us. So that's the essence of what the program's about. And what we want to be able to do is to really build it up into a positive note. I love being somewhat humorous, although obviously that can be debated. But the critical issue, for me at least, is that folks begin to understand that there is such an enormous need for us to understand what our value systems are all about, how we reinforce each other, how we're looking for different awarenesses to make ourselves feel better, and how we're able to exchange the energy of feeling good with other people. Because we know that the value of feeling good far exceeds the value of feeling bad. And not only does that come through in energy ways, but it also comes through in health ways, because we way too often talk ourselves into being sick, and then those repercussions are never healthy for us. So we're going to spend some time talking about beliefs today, and we will continue that on to probably the second week, because there's so much material to cover, and I don't want to do this in a light way where I'm just kind of glossing over things. I don't really like putting out talking points to people, because I want there to be some substance to understanding how we can take this information, how we can apply it, how do we evaluate our own sense of what we're doing with it, and how do we pass it on to others. So that is how we're going to move through today. I do want to put out the communication network with folks as far as people wanting to reach me. And right now we're working off of the internet. Obviously, that's how you're listening to me right now. But we're also taking emails from folks who have questions and comments, which I absolutely love receiving from all of you. And thank you very much for the time you invest in communicating with me. So we've gotten in a few of these interesting kinds of comments. I'll share some of them with you. A couple of them asking me where I'm from, which somehow seems to be relevant to some people, but I'm not quite sure how it fits into the program structure. But for those of you that are just dying to know where I'm from Detroit, Michigan. Originally, that's where I was born. And my life has taken me to various other places around the United States and even into Canada. But I'm not there now. I'm here, which is Houston, Texas. And I am actually broadcasting this out from a studio located in Humble, Texas. There's no pronunciation of the H because it's named after a guy from France. And in French, you don't pronounce the H's on front names. But he was very humble. It's just that his last name was Humble. And we take great pride in being able to pronounce his name correctly. So in any event, the studio is here down on Main Street. The station is Radio KAIR, and Bob and Linda Robertson run it, and I'm indebted to them for allowing me to be on the air. So thank you, guys. Also want to do a quick shout out to John, our new techie guy, who's marvelous, considerably younger than either Bob or I, but he'll get over it and we will all grow. So beyond that, the couple of questions that I'm going to answer real quick before we take our first break. One of the issues that continuously comes up is questions about hypnosis, and I really want to echo messaging that's already gone out, that I've already shared with folks. Clinical hypnosis is not the same thing that happens when you go to a comedy shop and you see a stage hypnotist. Okay, that's for entertainment. And it is hilariously funny if you've never been a part of an audience or participated on stage as a volunteer. That's not the kind of hypnosis stuff that we deal with when we do clinical work, because what we're focusing clinically is really understanding how the unconscious mind can change information by accessing intuition, imagination, creativity, and putting in that avenue a mechanism for positive change. The change that happens is directed by the individual, not by the person doing the trance work. The hypnotist really has no control over the information in terms of change, but acts more as a conduit or a person who's actually helping to direct the opening of the mind into those directions, and then the creative part of the mind does the work. Simply because we know that intuitively, if you're presented with information that is contrary to what you believe, the likelihood of changing how you believe is very remote. And to the degree that we think that we need to be in control, oftentimes that actually blocks information from happening. So we know that under the influence of a trance, while we are more suggestible, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to follow somebody else's direction. And in order to do that, we have to move the mind into a whole different direction, which has nothing to do with hypnosis, but deals with the issue of mind control and brainwashing. And when we talk about drinking the Kool-Aid, we're not talking about hypnosis. We're talking about an influence of somebody else's opinion, somebody else's belief of how people should be conducting themselves. And that is not at all what clinical hypnosis is about. So hopefully that clarifies the question that comes up, even though I'm sure we'll probably have to deal with it again because it continues to come up and people unfortunately tend to misinterpret the messaging of it until you actually experience it, which is something I encourage people to do. Saturdays, one Saturday a morning every month, one of the features of the class that I teach in certifying people to be clinical hypnotists involves bringing people in from the public who are curious to experience what it's like, and our students who are training to become certified hypnotists will actually teach people how to go into trance. And people come in with a specific issue or topic that they'd like to work on, and in about 20 or 25 minutes we begin the process of opening the mind just so people can experience what that is like. The effect of it is incredibly powerful in the sense that we're opening people's minds up to something different. And the fear of change tends to take a back seat to the hope for change, which is a whole different concept. When we start talking about reinstilling hope in people's minds and hearts, we're not talking about controlling them. We're talking about giving them something very positive that has an enormous energy connected to it. And hopefully, again, people are able to make choices for themselves that they may not understand they can actually make. And when you're feeling trapped into a place, whether it be a job that's going nowhere, whether it's a relationship that desperately either needs to end or needs some kind of counseling to get it turned around, or you're dealing with very negative and oppositional kids and you don't seem to have any strategy for how to turn that around, we want to get out of that sense of feeling trapped because we have an infinite ability to take on new ideas, new concepts that we can generate ourselves once we understand that we are capable of doing it. And that becomes the role of the bond between a client and a professional hypnotist. So that hopefully answers a little bit more of the confusion, unfortunately, that still seems to exist out there. The issue with medical hypnotherapy that's been coming out and is now very well established research-wise is showing overwhelming that we have an infinite ability to control pain, physical pain as well as emotional pain. It's being used by anesthesiologists all over Europe now, and as well as in Canada, and we're starting to see it in the United States. It's also a very effective way of limiting the impact of certain injuries, as well as the anticipation of other things that are happening from a medical standpoint. We know that we can offset some of the negative effects of chemotherapy and radiation treatment for cancer people. And what we're doing is really opening up the mind to get out of a survivor mode or get out of a victim role and get into a healthy mode, and understanding that those messages are real and people do have the ability to heal from injuries and from illnesses and disappointments. So we're going to move into that direction as well. So when we come back, we're going to take a little break in just a moment. We're going to talk about the issues of the beliefs, the ones that create negative hurt and the ones that create the trapping sensation of being locked into something that we don't really want to be experiencing, and yet we seem to be feeling no way out of that. So when we also come back, I'm going to give you the contact information in case you'd like to reach out to me. Beyond the emails, which is docmarty61@gmail.com, docmarty61@gmail.com, and I'll share with you how to reach out to me for more information. So let's take the break, and we'll be back in just a few moments. This is Dr. Marty. I am with you, and we are talking about mental wellness. My contact information for those of you who'd like to reach out to me, in addition to the email, is let's see, through the website, which would be www.alliedmentalhealthtx.com. It's allied, A-L-L-I-E-D, mentalhealthtx.com. The website's got all kinds of information about my practice, about my history, my training, as well as different things that I do as a mental health professional, as well as an instructor and a teacher and an author and the other things that I fill my time with. So I encourage you to take a look at it, and if you have any comments, feel free to send them in, and we can certainly talk about those things. The other contact is, if you're interested in actually talking to me in person, I encourage you to call the office. I generally am pretty accessible as long as I'm there, and if I'm not, I can always call you back. We can either text, and you already have the texting information, or you can call, and if I'm available, I'd be more than glad to chat with you on the phone. The phone number is 281-812-3322, 281-812-3322. The reason why I selected that phone number out of a whole bunch of ones that were possible is if you say that really fast, it's amazing how you can still say it. I don't like those phone numbers where you end up tripping over your tongue because you can't get it out fast, but I'm not going to practice it with you now, but yeah, when you say the number quickly, they still come out, which is kind of interesting. Also, the other way you can reach out to me is through the radio station, and I'm sure that if you call and Linda answers the phone, she'll be glad to take messages for me, and then forward them on to me. And that simply is, go into their website, which is www.radiokair.com, and there's directions for how to follow that process. So that's how to reach out to me. And I encourage you to do that because I love getting messages from folks. One question that came in a couple of days ago, which really prompted the discussion about beliefs, is that the gal wanted to know if she has had a belief since childhood about the way certain things are supposed to be, that she has held fast to, and is now running into situations in her late 40s about life being different than how she believed it was supposed to be. How does she reconcile the difference? Which is really a brilliant question, because we are being confronted almost daily with situations where our value system or our belief system or our attitudes are being assaulted by different people's points of view. At one point, not that long ago, we were entitled to have our beliefs without having to be ostracized or alienated or be made fun of or ridiculed. And yet that seems no longer to be the case because of the divisiveness that we're dealing with now, to the point where people are almost afraid to get into dialogue with other people and share beliefs because they either don't want to be put down for them, they don't want to be told they're wrong, they don't want to be insulted or yelled at, or in some cases actually physically assaulted, which really strikes the core of the nature of how we need to relearn how to focus on what we believe to be true without it taking on that kind of a negative proportion. So the issue that came up was, yes, the answer, we can change. We are very capable of changing. Oftentimes we have these unfortunate beliefs that tell us that we can't change. I cannot begin to tell you how many folks I have talked to over the age of 70 who tell me that this is just the way they are and they can't change, or they're too old, or you can't teach a new dog old tricks or new tricks. And yet we know that to be absolutely incorrect, because the attitude is what's blocking that formation of understanding new things. And when you have a belief that says, I've done this my whole life, and if people don't like it, it's their problem, that kind of a negative perception and negative presentation is limiting us in terms of how we can experience life better. Because there's an infinite number of ways that we can improve who we are, what we are, in our relationships. And we don't want to be limiting that to an old belief system, which may not even be ours to begin with, which is part of what we're going to take a look at. Because beliefs start to formulate in children's minds at a very, very young age simply through interacting with parents and other caregivers, because we end up wanting to be like them because we assume that that is what we are supposed to do. We model how they walk, we model how they hold a spoon or a fork, we model how they go to the bathroom. I mean, we model everything that we see from these people. So it would be natural for us to also model how they think, how they believe, and what they value. So it would be somewhat unusual, if not totally alien, for children not to share the beliefs of their parents. It begins to get contested at some point, though, when children start to interact with other children. And we discover that little children have a hard time understanding other children if the belief systems are totally different, and yet they still want to figure out a way of coming together, because children have a natural want to experience themselves in union with other kids. So either the belief system is not as focal as it might be otherwise, or it's just put aside. Because the issue of what we refer to as cognitive dissonance is not something that children want to experience. We don't want to be alienated from the kids that we are around. We want to connect with them. We want to be a part of what they're experiencing. So in that time frame of between the ages of 4 and generally 7 or 8, we start to find a commonality where we can actually bring kids together regardless of how they were raised or what their religious values were, even in situations where they don't even speak the same languages. And yet we find them developing friendships, becoming supportive of each other, wanting to learn more about each other. And those understandings create a new understanding of belief. And what we will typically understand as that develops is that children who are allowed to have that new development of belief tend to flourish. And they don't do it out of spite or resentment or oppositionality to parents, but they're able to take in the entire understanding of multiple beliefs and find commonality with it. And in that way, their minds are much more in peace with themselves. There's much less conflict, meaning there's much less anxiety, much less worry, and much less mental illness. So what we want to be able to do is to instill within the minds of children the ability to see things, not from a narrow framework, but from a wide perspective, so that they can understand how living in peace with other people becomes of value, and how we can actually share that awareness with each other. As we move forward, children become teenagers, and oftentimes what happens in that moment of awareness to become more independent is that we tend to have this rejecting message that we know more than our parents, which, later on we suddenly discover we probably didn't. However, we go through that time frame where we're trying to become independent, we're trying to become autonomous, we're trying to take on the values of other peers, sometimes at the expense of the things we were raised with. Unfortunately, being an opposite to a belief does not create another belief. It simply creates oppositionality. And the new beliefs, whatever they may be, sometimes never develop. And sometimes they just go open, meaning that there's not a belief system in its place. So what we often find is the extreme kind of positioning that people will be very upset about, that if you're rejecting my beliefs about anything, whether it's politics or religion or any other topic, parents oftentimes will jump into that extreme kind of thing, that if you're not following this, then you're going to go off into that direction, which is a total 180-degree turn away. And yet we find that that rarely happens. What we most often find is that the kids simply remain confused for a while until new experience and new understandings and new associations begin to develop, as well as the acquisition of new information and new knowledge. And then it all seems to get blended into a different kind of awareness of what those beliefs actually represent. So what we're looking at oftentimes when we're dealing with young adults, trying to define who they are in relationship to other people, is a collage of information that's being acquired, rather than just a simple understanding of the way the world is supposed to be, because we're not being raised in a totalitarian kind of environment where we're only allowed a belief, a singular belief about things. And what we end up doing is actually fostering the development of knowledge, as well as being able to instill wisdom. And then that becomes part of what gets passed down as these young adults move into middle adulthood, start raising families of their own, and influencing the educational system and the belief development of their own children. So we're looking at a belief that is more than just the collection of messages that little children acquire from specific sources. We also know that when we talk to some people, that we start hearing these limited beliefs, invariably what we hear are messages that take on real common themes. And the most common of the themes, even though it may not be worded exactly like the ones I'm going to share with you in just a second, but what they tend to take on is a perception of negativity. The message that I'm a failure becomes a well-stated belief that I'm not capable of learning new things, I'm not capable of advancing myself, I'm not capable of being successful. And we're not talking about a fear, we're talking about a belief. And to the degree that that belief is instilled, it is a very, very powerful message. And it's reinforced through the behavior. Another message that comes across when we compare ourselves to other people, like siblings most often, is that I'm not as good as my sister. I'm not as attractive as she is. And I hear that out of younger girls. I hear from boys that I can't compete with my brother. He's more athletic than I am. I'll never measure up to him. He's smarter than I am. I hear it from students of both genders who have these comments about mathematics that somehow, for some reason, we have singled out math as being the impossible subject to learn. And when you hear it from kids, it really is shaky, because the truth is there's nothing inherent about being a boy or a girl, or whether you can actually add or subtract, that defines your ability to learn mathematics. What we are dealing with is a belief that has been instilled that has very little factuality based to it, and yet when the belief gets acted on, it tends to reinforce itself. We also hear messages about good luck and bad luck, as if somehow luck is defining our fate. Or somehow if we had better luck, we'd have a better job, we'd have a better education, we'd be driving a better car, we'd have more successful children. And we attribute that somehow to this make-believe world that doesn't exist, but somehow we put great value in it as if somehow it's defining us. And then we lump it in with other things that really do have some luck value to them, like the numbers to a lottery, which we have absolutely no control over, but somehow that belief message is in there. If we had good luck, we'd have the winning numbers. When in fact, what we're dealing with is playing with totally randomization of numbers the way they appear. And the luck factor has absolutely nothing to do with the result, because when we're dealing with information, whether it's quantum information or whether it's just simple distribution of numbers, we are not dealing with a fate. We are dealing with just the way that stuff plays out. And yet we're assigning a belief as if somehow, if we had more of it, meaning more luck, we'd have more of this and more of that, and our lives would be easier, which we know is completely untrue. But we want to value it somehow as a different thing. The other messaging that we often contribute into this thing is that somehow the world is just not there for us. That somehow we are not there. Somehow we're not entitled to have a good relationship with somebody. Somehow we just can't be happy. And we put so much energy into those negative beliefs that we become constricted. And through that constriction, then we start dealing with depression, because we can't experience what we want to experience, and we end up giving up hope. And what we're wanting to do, again, is to open up the mind so that those messages that become beliefs lose their validity, because we can experience things differently. And once we do experience some things differently, we suddenly discover, sometimes it's not so subtle, but we discover that we can be different. We can be happy. We can be successful. We can have good relationships. And that becomes the thrust of what we're going with this. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to kind of set a tone for what we're going to do with our next program, which is going to follow up the messaging about belief, because we want to connect the positive energy to changing those negative beliefs and learning how to do that, which is what I will be sharing with you in our next program. So for right now, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to wrap things up for today and wish you well. So we'll be right back in just a few moments.